All right, Mona, those were some strong opening acts for you.
Yeah, I was thinking, I'm like, I'm not even going to bother to try to outdo anyone. Just
Yeah,
tell my story.
exactly. Um, yeah, so Dr. Mona Sobhani, cognitive neuroscientist and author. Yeah, you had, I suppose, a kind of a breakthrough from the materialist framework to a different understanding of the nature of reality. That's a little bit what you're going to chat with us about today.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm going to turn the baton over to you.
Um, so I mean, I have slides, but I'm not going to use them. Probably just tell my story, because they're kind of just filler anyway. And I'm sort of still processing everything Dean said, although he laid a good groundwork. Okay, so my story is I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, very traditionally trained. I got my PhD from University of Southern California. I did neuroimaging. I was focused on psychopathic traits because I love psychopaths and true crime. I did a postdoc at Vanderbilt with the MacArthur Foundation. It was law and neuroscience. So I was looking at the intersection between our neuroscientific findings and how they might have implications in the legal system. So it's very traditional and it was fun and interesting, but I definitely adopted the kind of undercurrent, which is in mainstream science, of believing the universe is random and meaningless. Any meaning that we find in our external environment is created by our brains. I was very anti-spiritual and anti-religious. I just wasn't really interested in those topics and didn't find any use for them. And none of my colleagues ever talks about that. So I was kind of hostile and very arrogant towards those types of things. And especially in our neuroscientific training, they teach us that consciousness comes from the brain, as Dean mentioned, that our brains are coincidence detectors, that the reason that you experience coincidences is because your brain is constantly looking for them in your environment, and then it connects the coincidences together and creates a story. So our brains are also storytellers. They are designed to create narratives and meaning out of these data points that come in. So I was a little more connected to the universe when I was in college. I was very interested in coincidences, and I was always observing things. I felt very connected. I wouldn't have called it spiritual at all. It was just the way that I lived. And I used to have precognitive dreams all the time, but I didn't know that they were weird or different. I didn't know they had a name. I didn't know any of that. But when I finished my training, when I finished my PhD, all of that had been erased from my mind. Like, I totally forgot I even had those dreams. I convinced myself that I misremembered, or I had my brain had created the coincidence and drew meaning from it. It's just exactly what they taught me. And this was all true, except for one thing in my life, which is that I'm Persian. So in our cultural heritage, we do have a tradition of divination, which my grandmother practiced, and then my mom learned from my grandma. So my mom would practice it at home too. And she used coffee grinds. People can use tarot cards or tea leaves, as Westerners like to make fun of it. But my mom used coffee grinds, and she was really good. And like, she would do it at family parties, and everybody would line up for these readings, or like, your mom is so good, everybody wanted a reading. And I didn't even pay attention to it. It didn't register in my mind as a thing until when I started graduate school. I would go home on the weekends and I would have coffee with my mom, and then she would kind of absentmindedly flip the cup over and read it for me. And, I would roll my eyes because I was an annoying daughter, and I'd be like, this is stupid, tradition. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with it. But I started taking notes because my friends started coming over. Every Sunday, they'd be like, are you going to be at your mom's? I want to come over. I want a reading. So then I started to take notes, thinking, well, I'm a scientist in training. I'll just take notes and see. And then this went on I was in grad school for 6 years. So by the end of grad school, it's weird, like, as everything else was being erased from my mind with my training, I got convinced though that the coffee readings, like my mom was more accurate than she was wrong. And she would predict things that even I wouldn't know were coming, things that neither of us could possibly think to predict. And I started to, pay attention to them and count on these readings, kind of. They were important, but I could not explain it with science. And so I just lived in total cognitive dissonance. And I don't know that I talked about it that much with many people, obviously my friends that would come over, but I just kind of lived with these two things, not bothering to reconcile them because I couldn't, because there was no foundation in mainstream science for it at all. Especially since my mom would see things sometimes months in advance, and that was really hard to reconcile. So I just went on living this way for a while. And then after graduate school, though, I started to have a sort of existential crisis. I started working and I would wake up and think, oh my gosh, this is what we do forever. We just wake up and go to work, and there's no meaning, in life, because that's what they had taught me in school. And I started to have this just crisis. And at the same time this was going on in my mind, my external world, I had a lot of things happen at once. Bad things, like just lost a job, and then a friend moved away, a really good friend, and then got in a car accident. And then my mom saw this event that she started being weird around. Like, she would read my coffee every week that I would go home, and there started being something. And then one day she awkwardly said, I feel like I have to tell you, I have to warn you, I feel like you're going to get really bad news. And she was upset about it. I was upset about it. I was like, well, what is it? And she's like, well, I don't want to say what it is because I'm not really sure what I'm looking at. She's like, I just know it's not going to be great, and it's not in your house, like in your family. So that's good. So every week for 6 weeks, I would go home to visit my parents. And every week she would be like, yep, it's still there. So just be prepared. And then finally, I got the news that one of our professors that I had worked on one of my experiments for my dissertation with, he was killed by one of his students in the program, brutally. And it was really awful because he was like the nicest professor in our program. And I called my mom and I was like, I think I know what the event was. And she was like, yeah, it was a death, but I had never seen anything like it before. And she's like, I didn't even know what to say because it was not like an old person dying or something I've seen. So this really shook me because it was not like about work or anything. It was life or death. And I thought, how could the information of someone's death be in the ethers and accessible by somebody else? And I started to wonder about destiny and fate, like, is it possible that these things exist? But my scientific mind was like, no, there's no way. But I mean, I had this frame breaking event that was confusing me. And so I was really upset about it, but I also had just started a new job. So I didn't have a lot of time to think. So I just went through the grief of that, and then got busy. And I was distracted by the new job, which was good for a while because so many things had gone wrong and I didn't know how to process any of that. So I was just distracted. And then I got in a relationship, and my mom, again, with the coffee, saw that she said it was going to be a good outcome, but then we ended up breaking up. And so I was like, how is this a good outcome? This is not what I wanted. So this is not good. And so and that was like the final, like stool of I think of like the legs of a stool. That was the last one to be knocked out. When that relationship ended, I felt despair and like lost hope. And for the first time in my life, really ever, and went into a really dark place of like, I just don't understand why we're here and we have to do this. So I was there for a while and for a few months. And then I thought, when I could get some energy up to think in a different way, I thought, well, what's interesting is the coffees. Like, how did that work? Why did she say it was going to be a good outcome? Why did it work and not work, in my opinion, in that case? And then why did it work for the death? And I just got interested in that and started digging into it. And I did not think, like, I was not at all familiar with Dean's work. I thought this stuff had not been studied, that there's no way it had been studied, or if it had, it was terrible research, because that's what that's the narrative in the mainstream. So I didn't bother looking for research initially. I just thought, I'll interview some of these intuitives, because I live in Los Angeles. My girlfriends had gone to intuitives. So I thought, oh, I'll just interview them about their experiences. I'll interview my mom, and then I'll interview my scientist colleagues to kind of understand, are any of them religious or spiritual, or have they ever had, experienced something that they couldn't explain with science like I had. And I found that all the scientists, all my friends, they all had an experience. Like, everyone had either an experience themselves, or someone in their family was intuitive, or they had a friend, or so everybody had a story. And also they were very open-minded, although I have to say we had these conversations in private, so they weren't public, but they were very open-minded. And it was confirmation that we were well trained. They're like, if there's, one instance of something, then you can't discard it. Like, you have to look at it, then the model's wrong. So we could all agree on that. And then finally, I think I started reaching out to, I heard, like, I wasn't listening to anything spiritual or paranormal or anything like that, but on a podcast I listened to that Chelsea Handler, the comedian, she was hosting it. She had a psychic medium come on, Laura Lynn Jackson, and then they mentioned the book Many Lives, Many Masters. And so they said it was a psychiatrist case study, so I thought it was a normal book. So I ordered it and it arrived, and it was not a normal book. It was about past life regression. But when I read it, it struck a chord, because the psychiatrist was Yale educated and Columbia educated. He was like an atheist, and he was describing this, unique situation with his patient, where she seemed to have past lives and carried over the trauma, and that through this altered state, she could release this trauma, and her, like, well-being and her symptoms improved. And as a neuroscientist, I was just interested in that purely for the therapeutic aspect, because I've always been interested in how few mental health treatment modalities we have to offer. And so I thought, this is weird. This is so weird. How could hypnotic regression from a past life, or from a fantasy or whatever, cure someone? And then also he would talk about spirits and psychic phenomena in the book. These were all things that he encountered in treating this patient. And that was a lot of the stuff I had encountered with my mom, with the intuitives. The intuitives I'd gone to, they all kind of subscribe to the same belief system, that we reincarnate, that at least the ones I saw, we reincarnate, that we come here for soul lessons, that we have soul groups. And so this is, I mean, you cannot imagine how foreign and wild this stuff was to me. Like, it was actually like painful to my ego to hear them say these things. But I listened, I recorded the sessions, I took notes, and what they said went over my head until I read Many Lives, Many Masters, and I started realizing that, they were coinciding. And I thought, oh, this is weird. There's probably more. There's probably more out there that I'm unfamiliar with. So I took all the references from his book. I read all his books. I read all the past life regression literature. And that's when I just started doing a lot of research. I read all of Dean's books, and then I started reading the actual papers, because I thought, I didn't believe it. We're trained not to believe unless you read the paper yourself and, scrutinize the research methods. But once I did that, and it was legitimate, it was all sound research. Some of it was methods I used in my experiments. Like, it was sometimes better statistics than I even bothered to use in some of my studies. Then I started to get nervous about, or confused, and my mind just started being like, oh my God, is it possible that this is real? Is it possible that there's this much research? Is it possible that we ignore all of this? And why do none of my colleagues talk about this or know about this? Or, it was very life altering. And so at first I was like, okay, this is cool. This is cool. This research is cool. Suggests reality is different. I'm gonna try to incorporate this. But I got into like reading the University of Virginia's literature also about reincarnation. I mean, some of this stuff is just super weird, you know, and as a mainstream scientist, you really like continuously just hit a wall. Like your head is hitting a wall. You're just like, I don't understand how this could be. Like I kept trying to find a mechanism, but this was the problem, is they never tell you when you're getting trained as a scientist that you're being trained in a physicalist, scientific materialist worldview. And they never tell you that there are other worldviews. And I never took philosophy, so I didn't know. So I thought that it was just known that we live in a physical universe. So when I encountered all of this material, I was like, where is the physical explanation for it? And that's what I tried to find initially. And it wasn't until I hit the literature, probably like Dean's books, where they started talking about consciousness and the alternative worldviews, that it was like the box I was in was blown open. And I thought, oh, wow, okay, if we just take the restraints around physicalism off, then a lot of this is possible. And it's not that big of a deal. It's actually reasonable, and it explains a lot of things that currently, you know, I was like I said, I felt like I was walking into a wall every time I would read something, because it was incomprehensible to me based on my training. And so then I started getting angry, which at my training, be like, why didn't they give us a philosophy course? How come no one told me? That the assumption is I'm being trained in physicalism and there's these other views and there's all this evidence, but the truth is they don't know either. So once I hit the philosophy section, I started to understand it better. And it was easier for me to talk about this stuff with my colleagues, although not many of them were well-versed in philosophy either. And so that was the intellectual journey. Okay, like that was my intellectual journey. But after that happened, then I'm a human. I had to update, and then the second part was the emotional journey. So I never realized how much of my identity was built around being a scientist, and how much my self-worth was built around that. And so once that started being threatened with this stuff, like at one point I was sitting on the floor surrounded by all these books, and I was judging myself. I was like, I can't believe I'm the type of person now who's reading this kind of stuff. And like, I just remember that moment so clearly, because I did catch it. You know, I was like, whoa, that's a mean thing to say to yourself. And I would have probably walked away. Like it was a crossroads, right? It was a crossroads. I was like, I know that if I turn my back and go back to who I was, I'll be more comfortable. And maybe I think I'll be happier. But I had been far enough down the road to know that I wasn't happy. I mean, that was what led me to this whole thing to begin with. And also, reading this material set my soul on fire or whatever in a way that nothing had in years. Like I was so excited to read this stuff, that I finally had, you know, like I went from basically wishing I didn't exist every day to being excited to wake up to read all of this new information that was very exciting and that really resonated with my life experiences. Because then I started having precognitive dreams again. You know, as soon as I remembered I used to have them, they started coming back immediately. And now I had a scientist's training to, you know, write down every night in a dream journal and see like what was, you know, meaningful and not. And so it was, I started to come up against my ego, and it was really hard. So I had to make a choice, and but I feel like I made that choice a million times a day, because I would wake up and immediately I'd be like, oh, you've been fooled. You fell for it. You fell for all the fraudulent evidence. And then I would have to like review all the evidence again in my head over. And this went on for a very long time, for maybe months. And until one day I was just so tired. I'm like, how many times am I going to have to do this? Like, I either believe the evidence or I don't. What is the like problem here? And that's when I had to like turn the awareness on myself and be like, there's an emotional issue here. It's not rational. If it was rational, I would have read the evidence once and made a choice. It's not rational. It must be emotional. And then that's when I had to start doing some healing work, right? So I started digging into all the healing modalities, past life regression, psychedelics, literally everything. So, and then once that started to alleviate a lot of this, because a lot of that angst, I think it was like angst, it was like ego versus soul or whatever. I don't like to put words around it, but these two parts of myself were fighting. And then, the angst started to kind of ease up. But that was just the beginning. So I talk about, I had a first dark night of the soul, which was my existential crisis, and everything that brought me to this worldview flip. The worldview flip helped me enormously. Like, for some reason, just the idea that there might be meaning, or that we're all interconnected, or that maybe all these life lessons, or all these things that are happening to me are lessons, instead of, viewing it like tragedy. That simple psychological perspective shift significantly improved my life to begin with. And that happened within a few weeks. So that was already great. But then as my identity started to shift, and it started, to encounter all the internal resistance around everything. And also, well, what happens is you're hitting these wounds from childhood, right? Because you're suddenly like, oh, I'm not going to belong in the group anymore. You hit belonging wounds, or like you're not good enough, or you don't feel safe, right? Like, how many of my scientist colleagues did I feel safe talking about these new topics with? So all these things started to come up, and I think that I have compassion for the scientists who maybe start down this road and turn back, because to continue is really, really hard. And you have to start healing all of those things, and it's not easy. And as you change, you're like the node of a network. As you change, everything in your life changes. So like your self-concept changes, your relationships change. So everything starts to change, and it's like chaos. And that's the second dark night of the soul. And that's where I've been for the past few years. So it's not easy. And I feel like people don't talk about that a lot. And I've noticed that, now I have a lot of friends who are scientists, scholars, physicians who've flipped, and we've all like scrambled through these flips on our own without resources, like just trying to figure out how to do this gracefully, and like find community in others like ourselves. And we're coming together to tell our stories. So one part of that's really important. This is something I'm doing. One is to get more scientists to talk about it, because I found my friends, my colleagues, they all had experiences. So one of my collaborators, we started going to the Society for Neuroscience annual conference, which we have like one big conference every year. I heard it's actually the largest conference in science now. I don't know if that's true, but it's definitely the largest conference in neuroscience, with like 30,000 attendees every year. So starting in 2022, we went and we organized a neuroscience and spirituality social. And I thought no one would come. I didn't even want to do it. I was so scared. But my friend Allison convinced me. She's like, no, it'll be great. It'll be really casual. And she made a bunch of flyers that said, have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain with science? Come join us. We're a group of curious scientists who want to ask the hard questions about reality. So she put up these flyers all around the conference venue. And then I had booked like a room for only 15 people. There were like 15 muffins, not a lot of coffee. And then 50 scientists or more, I don't even know. People were coming and going. It was a 3-hour event, but we ran out of space. We had to keep asking the hotel for more chairs. There were so many people, as grad students, postdocs, and faculty, who came, and they were asking, some of them were asking about precognitive dreams, some about God, some about psychedelics, some about psychic phenomena. It was so wild. I didn't expect it. Allison said she knew that would happen, but she's more intuitive than I am. So we did that the first year, and everybody wanted to stay in touch. So they requested of us references and resources. So we made a website, we made a Google group. I made a bibliography, but we're still working on adding that to the to the website. And then the following year we did, oh yeah, I would share this. Let me share my screen for a second. Oops, I have to make, sorry, I have to make Zoom wider. So there we go. That's the one. Yeah, so then last year we did another event at the conference, but this time we did a panel to explore alternative models of consciousness. So we had Donald Hoffman, Bernardo Kastrup, Julia Mossbridge, Jonathan Schooler, and Christoph Koch came too. He was supposed to, he didn't want to give a talk twice because he was doing one at the SFN thing, but he came to just talk about what if consciousness doesn't come with their brain, or what are other models, other philosophies. So it was a really great event. We had more people than the first time. I think we had like 300 people total cycle through over the 3 hours. And I think we did an informal poll of the group, and we asked, has anyone had an experience they couldn't explain with science? And there were about 20 to 25% of people raised their hands. And so we're doing it again this year. It's, I think, in 2 weeks. This year it's in Chicago. And so same exact thing, not a panel this time. We're going to do the social, because I felt like that was a much more friendly community where people could share their stories. Although I did notice the first year that we did this, people reached out to me afterward to talk to me privately to tell me their stories, because I don't think they wanted to do it in public. But it was heartbreaking because these people have been holding on to these stories a lot of times for most of their lives, very significant turning points in their lives, and they had never told anyone. And they were like so excited to tell me. And that's why Allison and I decided to continue, because we thought this is a shame. Like, no one should have to do this alone. No one should have to feel shame about it. But there is a lot of shame and stigma and taboo in the scientific community about this, despite the fact that most of them have probably had an experience or know somebody who has or will at some point in their life. So that's where we are. I don't need to share. Oh yeah, I write about these things in my Substack, which is called Cosmos, Coffee, and Consciousness. Mostly this year I've been writing about the Dark Night, because, as I mentioned, I'm sort of still working through that. And then I wrote a book about my experience. And I'm gonna stop sharing there, and I'll take any questions.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, really, really amazing to hear your personal journey on all of this. And that was a great group you had. I mean, you had like obviously a lot of overlap. Bernardo and so on, they were probably virtual or in person?
Most of them were virtual. Julia was there, and Christoph was there.
So how is this now influencing kind of your professional like focus? Like, or is it not? Is that still kind of separate,
Well, I was working at the University of Southern California as a research scientist, but I wasn't doing neuroscience, I was doing digital health. But I left there after I wrote the book because, well, I didn't want to do that job anymore. And I started my own consulting company. Most of it is normal neuroscience. I do some writing for ION, so I work with Dean, like with them, just writing blogs and scientific writing. But yeah, I guess the majority of it is normal mainstream neuroscience.
Yeah. And so it seems like you're seeing more scientists being amenable or open to this conversation.
Yeah, as Dean mentioned, I was actually happy to hear him. It's because of the psychedelic research, I think. They've really opened up, or slowly they're opening. One other reason is because we've noticed graduate students coming in want to study these things, especially psychedelics. So it's like they come in, they've tried psychedelics, they've had these experiences, so they come in and they kind of dance around like, am I going to be able to study this? And then, the older scientists have to be like, we're going to need to talk about how we phrase this, or we talk about your research plan, because you can't go too wild,
Yeah.
or you won't get funding.
I mean, there are very few people who study the intersection of psychedelics and psychic phenomena. I think David Luke is the only one that I know of.
No, no, I don't know of anybody,
Yeah.
but that would be interesting. That should be funded.
Yeah. What area interests you most in all of this? What would you love to be able to research, and where do you see the most cutting edge, interesting progress could be made?
I'm really interested in how, as you do healing work, how your intuition and psychic abilities open up, because I've noticed that. I don't know if some ground level, like as Dean was saying, genetic capability, like is it cap, or who knows, because
Mhm.
none of this has been studied. But I think that that's really interesting, because I think that the more, like, I kind of see it as you're this entity, and as you go through life, it's almost like you pick up debris, and then you have to like get rid of the debris, and after that, it's like you have a stronger connection. But I would like, I mean, that's my sense of it. So I'm curious to know if that, I'd be interested in studying that to see if it's true, if you could quantify it.
Did you say debris? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I mean, like trauma and disconnection from yourself, basically, like inauthenticity. Um, so it's a combination of psychology, neuroscience, and spirituality, I guess.
I mean, it seems like trauma is often something that releases or makes available psychic abilities, like for like channels and mediums and all that stuff. And then anecdotally, I don't even know if it's true, but what they say about like the programs that were done with like the kids, I don't even know if that actually happened, but to sort of induce trauma to create like psychic capacities in a way. Yeah.
That's true. I have heard that. I don't know too much about that. I don't know if that's been like officially studied.
That's not been, no. No,
Uh,
I don't think so, no. No.
like, yeah, unfortunately, not much of this has been studied. So there's a lot of questions,
Yeah,
right?
you can't study something when you just negate it, like when you completely act like it doesn't exist. I mean, how are you going to study it?
Yeah, I know. Well, that's why we're doing the events, because I feel like even though it's one conference, it's one field. I mean, hopefully we can encourage other people to do it themselves. The problem is they're expensive to throw. So, but every time you do that, it's like if someone tags along or sees someone else share their story, then they'll be more likely to do it themselves. And it's, hopefully it'll be like a domino effect. But
Totally.
yeah, there's no other way. You just kind of have to. It's also not like you're trying to change their minds, Like the thing is that a lot of people who end up there, like, have probably had the experience. You're just trying to, make it okay for them, or give themselves permission to talk about it or accept it. Because at least that's how it was for me. It's like I was trying so hard to find somebody to give me permission. And that's what I was looking for, was all the other scientists who had already flipped. And Jeff Kripal helped me a lot with that, with not only with his book, The Flip, but like personally. So yeah, I think that people are just looking for community and permission, because you really in science do not feel like you have permission, also because it's this hierarchical system. Like you're constantly made to feel like you're not good enough. Like
Yeah.
you might be a professor, but you're not tenured. You might be in grad school, you're not a PhD yet. You might be a PhD, you're not a postdoc. Like
Yeah.
there's, yeah, all this stuff. So you always feel like I don't have a right to say anything.
Yeah. I want to turn it over to see if other people have questions, but I had one last little question. In the beginning, you were like, "Oh, I really like psychopaths," and I couldn't help but ask, what do you like about psychopaths? Why were they so interesting to you? And is there some relationship between that and kind of being interested in these other dimensional things, realms?
I don't know the connection yet. I like them because they're such extreme forms of humanity, like
Yeah.
of human nature. Like it's like what makes humans special. Empathy is one of those things. And psychopaths seem to really lack that. So it's interesting.
Well, let's see if anybody has a question. I guess that was Guy's question. Sorry, Guy. Um, anybody, Guy, you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought of another one. So yeah, my question is, as you've had this dark night of the soul experience twice, essentially, why do you think it happens? What's the kind of evolutionary benefit, if any, to having that kind of deeply traumatic or unpleasant experience, if you think there is one?
Yeah, it's probably to know who you really are. Because I feel like well, that's what happens is you get confused about, you think you're one thing and then this stuff happens to you and then suddenly you're like, wait, if that's not who I am, then who am I? And you have to constantly ask yourself like these, these questions of like the story I said in the beginning, I'm like, I'm the kind of person who reads these books. And you kind of have to dig into that to be like, what kind of person is that? And why aren't you that? Or why are you that? Or so I think, yeah, the point of that is to know find out who you really are.
But do you think a lot of it was because you made it public and you came out saying, I'm a neuroscientist who now believes in this stuff? So then you're kind of like putting yourself on display to, and people could ridicule you.
No, I haven't found that. It's not that. It's more personal. Everything's very personal. Like most of the angst or tension is in my personal life.
With people who haven't made the flip yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And have you developed a kind of a protocol with such people? Do you like give them a Jeffrey Kripal book for their Christmas, slip a Dean Radin book under their pillow? And
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm always recommending Dean's books because they're so good with the science and they're funny. And Kripal, but Kripal's a special kind of book not for everyone. So I try to feel them out. And it's kind of you tiptoe, you say things, you see how they respond, and then see if there's like a door open. But I will say I have found most people want to talk about this stuff. Most people are more open than you think that they are. And I also have the understanding now that if somebody is being aggressive or whatever, that it's not about me, that it's about them, because I would experience that myself. Like it was all about me. It was all about you're threatening my self-concept, or you're threatening my idea of myself of being smart or whatever it is. So I get that. And so I don't take it personally. So you just have to have compassion for wherever they are in their journey. Cause I had about a million different stages of this.
yeah, I mean, for me, it was a long time ago, but I still very much remember. And you kind of like, yeah, you have just at a certain point, you just realize some people are going to come along with you and others are just, it's not for them. Like my mother, like I laugh because her apartment number is 3D, like 3D realm. Like I think she's just, the 3D realm is where she's going to be, she's not in this life for her to move into this other way of understanding. Yeah, I like Carlos Castaneda talked about the assemblage point, which I think is a very useful idea, that somehow people assemble their whole model of reality from a certain point. He had it as, Don Juan had it like as a physical point on the back of the shoulder. He would like slap Castaneda in the sort of novelizations, whatever those were. And when he slapped him, then he could move the assemblage point up, and Castaneda would suddenly see into these different realities. But I think there's something true to that everybody has like an assemblage point. Some people, their assemblage point can become more flexible. Other people, it's really rigid, And I think once you accept that that's just the way it is, it's actually kind of, it's like, okay, like the person is fine in this life. They're just, doing that.
And yeah, I mean, psychedelics actually helped with this too, like making it very experiential. Because even I remember when I first did psychedelics, yes, but I did 5-MeO DMT, and after that, actually, that was a catalyst for a lot of things really moving towards disconnection between me and other people. But it's such a like, because
I'll just describe quickly the 5-MeO DMT. I don't know what your experience was, but it can be very much like almost like a nirvana, kind of like white light experience. Like
Oh,
you don't,
no, of course not. But the people I was with had that. They had the like love. And then mine was like, I went crazy. And then I became paradox. Like I
yeah,
became paradox. And then, well, so I did it twice. So the first time I became all of space and time, and my ego dissolved and I was just pure awareness. That was beautiful. But the second time I thought I actually died. So I had a near-death experience, and that was very traumatic. And then that had to be worked through. But then looking back on it, I was like, I was in the middle of a transformation, of course. They had mentioned that. They're like, I think it's the most likely psychedelic for people to have near-death experiences on. So, and it's like I was going through a death and rebirth. So it made sense. But yeah. But it's so extreme that when you come back from it, it's really ontologically shocking. And you're like, I don't know how I'm ever gonna like talk to people again.
yeah, totally. And it's really unpredictable because sometimes you have that experience where you're like, uh-oh, and then you have to kind of use every day. Like I think every day we have like a certain amount of available like psychic energy or psychic processing power. And I would find that like 20% of it was going into, how do I contextualize that experience? Like, what does that mean for my life? Like now my ego really doesn't seem like it means anything. How do I deal with that?
Yeah, it was really, really challenging, but beautiful. I'm grateful I did it, but it was challenging.
Gina, I had a question for you actually. What do you know about China and Russia in terms of psychic research and psychic experiments? I think I heard from somebody that there are scientists in China who are very interested in this area, but I haven't had any official confirmation of that.
So I've heard that as well. China, India, Southeast Asia, the even those who are trained in Western scientific methods, the cultural acceptance is so strong that it actually, I think you put on your national security hat, I think people in the West should pay a lot more attention to it. Because if there probably is a lot of government funding that goes into these areas that is not available in the West, which means that they're likely to be faster understanding of what's going on. And it, as I said before, that if we learn a lot more about this, we will learn more about the nature of our interconnections, which is a kind of a power. Knowledge is power. And power in the world today can be used for good or bad. And so when we think about what other countries would like to do, it behooves us to pay attention to it at minimum. It's very similar to as I said before, about UAPs. The reason why people are interested in UAPs is because of the threat. That's the only reason the government ever gets interested in this stuff. So is it a threat if our science falls behind in this domain? The answer is probably yes. And I'm about as pacifist and anti-military person as you will ever meet. And yet I do understand then that we can't ignore the fact that people in other countries have a very different view of these kinds of things, and they will call it different names. I mean, qi is essentially psi.
Yeah.
And so qi in a Chinese context is extremely different in terms of its acceptance than it is in the West. And so that I think should concern us.
Actually, Mona, I was curious because you talked about not having an idea of what would be like the mechanism. And I was wondering if you'd also looked at the work of Amit Goswami. He wrote a book called Physics of the Soul, where he sort of, he'd written a manual on quantum mechanics. He's a quantum physicist. I think was involved with ions also, so Dean must know him. But that book I found really fascinating because he basically argues that if you understand the mechanisms of quantum physics, it gives us potentially a sort of a theory we can make about how there could be a kind of like reincarnating aspect of ourselves, and also the subtle bodies might exist as these sort of non-local quantum phenomena that are consciousness based but don't have any less reality or validity because they're consciousness based.
Yeah, I've read so many different theories, and at first it was really exciting, but to be honest, I actually don't care anymore what what it is. Like, I'm really glad that other people do and are digging into it. But after like an initial, like just taking a wide swath of it in, I thought, okay, this is confusing enough. At least I know there's a possibility of models, but like, I don't really actually care which one it is. And it seems like we're nowhere near figuring it out. So whatever.
Mm. All right, cool. Maybe we'll wind down for today, unless anybody has a last question. Dean, what do you think about the exploring psychedelics and psychic phenomena? Do you think that because people talk about psychedelics as non-specific psychic amplifiers, do you think that could be a powerful avenue? And is anybody doing it that you know of?
I once had a conversation with the folks at Johns Hopkins who were doing psychedelic research 10, 15 years ago, and they wanted to do experiments because they kept noticing in the patients that they were working with that they were reporting spontaneous telepathy and all kinds of things. And so we talked about how that might be done, and usually using unconscious physiological methods, because once you're in that kind of intoxicated state, you're not interested in doing experiments. So you can't do anything that involves conscious report. But you might be able to do something with an unconscious stimulus. So we talked about it. We've talked about this frequently at IONS because we're interested in that as well. But as long as it's still difficult to do this and legally, we put the whole institute at risk if we do it. So we haven't been able to do anything publicly. Privately is a different matter, but then we can't report it. So we're kind of stuck at this point that we would love to do experiments with different kinds of psychedelics. And we think we have protocols that would actually work. But again, if, part of this scientific aspiration is to do something and then report it publicly, let people know about the results. And if you can't do that, well, it reduces the interest. And again, to say nothing of the possible legal ramifications.
Well, I mean, that leads to a follow-up question. In a purely speculative, fictional way, if there had been private explorations of these things, what might they have found, by doing that?
Well, in a hypothetical way, what they find is that especially telepathic rapport, if especially done in groups, telepathic rapport goes through the roof. And in ways that are not always all that great. I mean, this is one of if you are suddenly merging with everybody in the group, you know everything about them, or at least you know something about the darker side that they wish you didn't know. So, yeah, I mean, it's both interesting and probably useful and slightly dangerous to go into realms where you are that open. This is one of the reasons why I take a pretty cautious approach in our laboratory work, where we're learning bits and pieces and we're not stressing people out too much because we don't know the dangers yet. And so one of the ways that I like to talk about this is that for many, many years, I was skeptical about the whole thing about spoon bending because that sounds ridiculous. That's not possible. And then one day I did this, where I bent the bowl of a spoon in half just by touching it. You can't do that with ordinary force. It would break your fingers to do that. And yet I did it myself, so I couldn't deny that this was possible. And so some of the other stories I've heard with people taking something like a rebar and going whoop with a rebar, and they're not particularly strong, and that's also impossible. And what that tells me is that first of all, it's frightening that we can do that because I have no idea how it can be done. And second, it means that there's probably a lot more that we can do that starts pushing into the realm of magical lore, which it increases the likelihood that those things are real, but it also increases, in my case at least, the fear that we really don't know anything about what's going on here. It's like we're playing with atomic weapons and we might accidentally press the wrong button. And so that's why I'm taking tiny baby steps where at least along each way that I take a baby step, I have some sense of what's going on, and instead of pushing it really hard. And I'd admit, it really has to do with fear of not knowing the kind of power that we're dealing with.
Well, it sounds like you're being a lot more cautious than today's AI researchers. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Well, guys, it's 4:01. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you so much for Dean and Mona for those amazing presentations, and Jamie, although he left us. And yeah, look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Thank you so much.